Well, we're going to continue our coverage now of the Attawapiskat audit. The federal government has not released it yet, but there were reports this morning that it shows a majority of reserve transactions lacked documentation. For more, we're joined by one of the guys who spearheaded all of this, Ezra Levant, host of The Source. Ezra, good to see you. Any surprises in this report?
You know what? I've been following the Attawapiskat story for more than a year.
Yeah.
And if you actually go on Attawapiskat's own government website, Attawapiskat.org, they have been publishing their own financials year after year. Oh. And so I've gone through those financials, and I've seen their own accountants saying there's no paperwork. Let me explain what it means, no paperwork. Someone comes to you, someone drafts a check saying pay Clayton Kennedy $20,000. And, I mean, you could sign it, or you could say, well, what's that for? Show me the invoice. Show me the contract. What work was done? That's what paperwork means. For these check runs, they would just print the checks, and the people with the signing authority would just sign them with no backup documentation. There was no reason for these checks given. And that's a problem when the chief, Teresa Spence, and her boyfriend, Clayton Kennedy, her boyfriend happens to be the town manager. They've got signing authority, husband and wife, and surprise, you know what his contract is, and I found this on Attawapiskat.org. He gets paid $850 a day, plus expenses, plus travel, plus office, plus computer. So this cozy little family business they got going called a reserve has made them millionaires. She drives a Cadillac Escalade. I mean, he jets around all over the place. There is an enormous amount of money on the reserve. It's just clumped up amongst friends and family. For example, the Hukama family. I have no idea who they are. I just look at who's getting the big government check. 8 members of the Hukama family happen to be the lucky ones. There's 300 homes on this whole reserve. They've dumped in about almost $500 million in the last 6 years between the government and the diamond mine. $500 million, 300 homes. Do the math. Whoa. Last year alone, if you were to take all that money that's poured in the top of the funnel and apportion it equally to every household, that's $280,000 per house, and it's tax-free on a reserve.
Per annum?
Yeah, per year. Wow. Per year. So there shouldn't be any leaky homes there, but there are. So that's the disconnect I'm talking about. How can you pour in almost $500 million in the last 6 years? $325 million from the diamond mine, $100 million according to the new audit from the government. That's close to $500 million, and still have leaky roofs. Well, I'll tell you how. And let me just spit out a couple of quick facts, and then I promise I'll take a question. I went through their financials. For example, they gave $200,000 last year to gifts. What? They spent 36 grand on a goose hunting party. Huh? They spent $96,000 on a new Zamboni. They already had an old Zamboni. They wanted a new one. Say what? So you got leaky roofs. They got a $9 million stock and bond portfolio. They got Google, they got Pfizer, they got Halliburton, they got all the blue chip stocks. They wouldn't dare sell that to fix a leaky house, God forbid. Something's broken on Attawapiskat.
But what is the mandate of the community there? Are they supposed to share all these proceeds? I mean, or is it set up so that the chief does make more money and then uses the money at his or her discretion?
Well, the key to understanding Indian reserves is to realize that chief is just what they call their mayor. And band councilors are just what we call aldermen. They're not holy men. They're not priests or gurus. It's just they call a mayor of an Indian band a chief. So, you know, would we in a town of 1,500 people, 300 homes, if the mayor and her husband were making close to 300 grand a year tax-free, if there were 21 full-time politicians and blowing this kind of dough, we would say there is a deep problem here. The thing is, you know, we have a saying, you can't fight City Hall. Imagine if your City Hall had 10 times more control of your life, told you which house you had to live in, told you where you go to school, I mean, they have so much control over the lives of people on the reserve, chiefs do. We would never tolerate it in a non-native town. And they don't have the financial controls that we do. They don't have access to information. They don't have auditors general. They don't have the kind of accountability or democratic governance that we do. We would not accept living under that kind of corrupt lifestyle in other cities.
But they do a lip service by putting on a website, for instance, as you yourself have access. I'm wondering if the chief knew about this in advance. I mean, is she being proactive in setting up on the island and taking on offense as her best defense?
Absolutely. You know what? Attawapiskat is such a crisis, and there's so much money that the government, I mean, every year their financial statements are put online. That's what I used to read. But today the government leaked a special audit to some left-wing newspapers, the La Presse in Montreal, the Toronto Star. This was a special audit done by Ottawa after the housing crisis. And this is where 80% of the checks signed without enough paperwork, no job descriptions for these millionaire bureaucrats. I think Chief Teresa Spence got a copy of that audit privately on August 28th, excuse me. So
Months ago.
Yeah, so she knew that this was going to hit the fan. So it is so clear to me, speaking with my political hat on now, that, they say a good offense is the best defense. So she went to Ottawa, she made this big ruckus, she went on this fake hunger strike. Sorry, today's day 27. You don't still look like you're 200 pounds when you're hunger striking after 27 days. I mean, you should look like a skeleton then. But it's a fake hunger strike, just like it's a fake crisis in Attawapiskat. This Chief Teresa Spence is presiding over the worst managed reserve that I've encountered, and there's 600 of them. Here's the question for you, Pat. Will she be allowed to attend the meeting this Friday with Stephen Harper? The Assembly of First Nations, that's Grand Chief Atleo, is picking the chiefs who's going. Stephen Harper's not. Will Grand Chief Atleo really allow Chief Spence, who's under this moral cloud for financial mismanagement, will he allow her to come to that meeting?
Was my bet on this?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well,
she's getting the headlines.
Well, that's right, but stealing them not just from Harper, but from Atleo. And what happens if in the wake of this audit, there's an RCMP investigation? Let me give you an example. Joe Fontana is the mayor of London, Ontario. He directed 21 grand, allegedly, to his kid's wedding. He's got 4 criminal charges against him. The kind of money that Chief Teresa Spence is directing to herself and her boyfriend, will that yield criminal investigation as well? Does Stephen Harper really want to meet with someone under this ethical cloud? Does Sean Atleo really want to be associated with it? That's my question.
Okay, we'll have an answer. And I assume you're going to take this up on the Source tonight.
Oh boy, there's a lot to go over tonight. That's at 5 p.m.
I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks, Pat.
Absolutely.
Cheers.
Ezra Levant, host of The Source, joining us here in the studio.